9 people and see more come in.
Let's get going. Okay, welcome everyone. We are thrilled to be part of Twin Cities Startup Week. This topic we're going to dive into today feels very new in the marketplace. And so we're anticipating that a lot of you are coming out of curiosity, and we'd love to know at the end. We do have some time set aside for Q&A to really kind of see where people are at in their workplace conversations and how we can move this forward, looking at a very top level of anything from our culture to productivity, all the things. So we're going to get into that today. But I do want to just welcome everyone and again say this topic is normalizing not drinking in the workplace. And we did have 40 some people registered. It's getting some traction on LinkedIn. So I'm excited for people that are tuning in, but also that can catch it after the event on Hopin. And I think, we have a group of HR professionals, potentially leaders, marketers, event planners, and just people in an organization that care about this. All four of us will kind of share our connection and our lived experiences. And I think a lot of this conversation and movement forward will come from individuals in their workplace, no matter what their role is, looking for ways to move this forward. So we're going to share as we go through a little bit of our personal connection to the idea of recovery and alcohol misuse. And then I think I'll just start by introducing myself. So I'm Jen Gilhoi. I personally did not navigate workplace well. 10 years ago, I was at the height of burnout in a corporate environment and a company of 350 people, and I did not know where to turn. I found an avenue to recovery myself. I've got now 8 years of sobriety, but at that time, 10 years ago, I did not feel supported in workplace. I was in an events and marketing kind of role where alcohol was all around me all the time. So it is definitely a lived experience for me, and I want to move the conversation into what we can do in workplace to support people who really just choose not to drink for whatever reason. So that's another thing that you all should know, is that this conversation is for sure supporting people that are in recovery, but also, again, just anyone who chooses not to drink. So 8 years ago, I started my own company, Spark Track, which is marketing communications. And then in May of 2022, launched Zero Proof Collective. And I'm just going to read the mission because we've been crafting this with my business partner, Kate Faulkner, who's also online here. ZPC exists to promote and create spaces where non-alcoholic beverages are discussed, thoughtfully crafted, served, and celebrated as we bring community together, educate, evolve culture, and ultimately increase revenue in the non-alcoholic industry. And I'm doing a TED Talk on this topic coming up in October, so we'll love to continue the discussion and hear from everyone on this topic. All right, so Marin is our slide advancer, in addition to many other things. If you would move forward to the next slide. This is the premise. We've got just a couple nuggets for everyone to kind of get into the concept of what we're going to be talking today. So this little quote here: we can all benefit from a workplace culture that decentralizes alcohol. Normalizing not drinking in these spaces can support anyone who chooses not to drink for whatever reason. Next slide. And this is also kind of a concept that we've used and talked about. What does change look like? And we're going to get into that today. To us, change really looks like happy hours with coworkers that offer respectable non-alcoholic options, and we'll talk about exactly what that looks like. Gatherings that are activity, not booze-based, and a workplace that understands productivity and excessive alcohol use don't mix. So those are a couple of thoughts as we kind of get into the content today. And if you would advance one more time. And so I'm super excited to bring this group together today. If you'll notice, Chris Thompson, founder of Sober Sidekick, is not able to join us today. He's actually based out of Arkansas and just was not able to make it. So Chris Aburime will be kind of stepping in for some of the concepts that we've talked about with Chris and sharing that perspective. But I'd love it now if all of the panel members would introduce themselves, and we'll kick it off with Marin.
Hi, I'm going to do my best to be your slide advancer. We didn't dry run that one. This is what you do when it's virtual. It's so hard to not see all your faces, but I see your names and I'm happy to see some names I recognize. So thanks for joining us for this conversation. I'm Marin Nelson. I'm based outside of the Twin Cities in Minnesota, and I'm VP of Revenue for a startup in a B corporation called visit.org. And that will be part of what we talk about today. The why of my joining this company just not even 3 months ago after 5 years at Salesforce for the work that we do at visit.org. While at Salesforce, and how that ties in, as I co-founded and served as president to an employee resource group called Soberforce. And by the time I left, after just a year and a half, we were up to 500 members, and started that with other sober sales leaders. I've been in long-term recovery for 17 years and started it to create safe spaces in the workplace for people in recovery, people who are sober curious, sober allies, to really create a community and destigmatize addiction in the workplace. And so that's why I'm here on this panel. Thanks for having me. Laurie, I'll pick you.
That sounds good. Thanks everyone for being here. It really is great to see so many people and names that we know. So thank you. I'm a family recovery coach. And what that means is that I walk alongside family members, or really anybody that is concerned about someone struggling with substance use in their lives. And, you know, the reason I do this is largely based on lived family experience. We navigated the disease of addiction largely behind the veil of shame and stigma for about 20 years with my younger brother, and he ultimately lost his fight with addiction in October 2017. And that just lit something up inside of me that really pulled me away from my previous career and into this field of helping family members, friends, colleagues really come alongside someone they love and to help navigate the disease of addiction with love and compassion. Prior to that, though, I did spend 25 years in sales and marketing in the tech startup space. So Twin Cities Startup Week is near and dear to my heart. Spent a lot of time scaling and growing tech companies. And so when Jen reached out to me and said, hey, I've got this idea for this panel, it was just kind of merged both of my careers. And I'm really happy to be here to kind of talk about this and how we can create healthy workplaces, healthy families, healthy communities when substance use challenges do exist. Chris, I think it's your turn.
There we go. Thank you, Laurie. My name is Chris Aburime. I'm co-founder and CMO of Sober Sidekick. It's an engagement platform for peer-to-peer support, and it also helps scale empathy, so connection. It's actually something that has grown over the past year and a half or so, from 10,000 to 130,000 members. You know, maybe we'll get more into that as relevant throughout this talk. But the reason that this space is important to me and is personal is that about 6 years ago, I got sober while starting another company. And since then, I've been passionate and fascinated about why you know, why we do have this need to drink at work. Or drink around work and around our colleagues, and been passionate about the space from a professional perspective, entrepreneurs and professionals, and helping them get and stay sober. I'll talk a little more about that and about that culture. But my background is in advertising and digital marketing, over 20 years doing that, for the past 2 or 3 years, I've been focused on being a peer in our space, which is the recovery community, and building and investing in technologies that help people like me get and stay sober.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing that. I think, you know, we've all come to this topic with very different journeys, but also this shared passion. And many of us are working either full-time or even part-time trying to move some of these initiatives forward. So yeah, Marin, if you would advance to the next slide, I can kind of give everyone an overview of what we want to talk about today. So instead of diving really deep into one area of this, I think it's important that we talk about everything from culture to community, conversations and support and productivity, And then the end, we're going to wrap it with these concept of there are actually some approaches and tools and some really great models that we have all experienced. They're not really widespread or talked about, so that we are really excited to share with you. And then we'll close it out and have a little time for Q&A just to hear from the audience. So as we go, if you want to jot down notes or contribute to the chat, if you have questions, please do that. So let's kick it off. Chris, in your intro, you kind of touched on culture, and one of the first times we got together and talked about this, all of our experiences are different in this area, but really starting with what the big question, how does leadership and HR partner in this conversation? What creates a culture of drinking, and how do healthy cultures versus unhealthy cultures look? How do they behave? And maybe actually I'll start with Marin, because the leadership and HR conversation piece of it really was something that came to light when we most recently chatted. So Marin, if you would just talk a little bit to that.
Absolutely. So in the experience of creating SoberForce as an employee resource group, we kind of just did it. We figured it out as we went. So I also want to say that to anyone who's in the workplace and wants to create a group, and it depends on the culture and the permission at which you have to do. But we had pretty express permission to create groups that align to Salesforce values and support of other employees. And so without really knowing what we were launching, we put together a vision and mission that was employee-led of other people who were in recovery, because we wanted to help. And it was in the middle of COVID, pre-vaccine. People are really struggling. Relapse rates were high. We've continued to see that trend, unfortunately, continue, with overdose death rates spiking and people in isolation really struggling with relapse. So we launched it, but once we launched it, and right before we launched it, actually, we did partner with HR. And I raise this because I think that HR plays a really critical role in highlighting the benefits that are available for things like treatment or quit programs, time off of work, family medical leave. But it can feel daunting and sometimes scary to approach HR when you're in that point of struggle, or your family is struggling. You're worried about repercussions, even if the employer would say absolutely not. As that employee who's going through it for yourself or a family member, it can feel scary to get HR involved. So we were also really trying to be a bridge between the benefits that existed, but making it a safe space also, because it was an employee-based support group and community. And so I think it's really important as we think about the role now that I am at this company, visit.org, where we're delivering social impact experiences to employees, connecting them to global nonprofit networks. HR is often a buyer of ours, one of the people that we work with most often. And so it's an awesome opportunity also for them to facilitate and support and extend ways of connecting that are not centered on alcohol to their employees, and really rebrand who is HR and what's the role that HR plays. So 2 different examples of where HR plays a really important role, but also leadership being the face of and leading the cause area, specifically to SoberForce around creating safe spaces that weren't based on alcohol, was really important. And it was a partnership. But how you go about it will directly impact who participates and chooses to participate in it, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, why don't you chime in on the culture piece of this and in your story?
It's something that I know I'm very lucky about, with the culture of the place where I was when I got sober. It just simply was a culture of inclusion and support. That's not everywhere, and it's not because people are bad. It's just that it's not something that, there's not a lot of vulnerability, and it's not something that people feel safe doing it. It's your job on the line, and that's what people think about the most. But I got very lucky, and I had a support network. And so I realized how powerful that was right away. And I know that I wouldn't have felt the same way in other places that I've worked. And I didn't get sober, for a very long time, until that time. So you mentioned earlier creating activities that didn't center around drinking. And I think that was a big piece. There were always things to do. And it was a small company. Even when it was just founders, at the company, we did things together, and it didn't surround alcohol. and some people decided to drink and some people didn't. It was something that was jarring to go to then, an industry happy hour where you would get a ticket and you would go to get your drink that wasn't alcoholic, and they would look at you like you're crazy, and then usually would shove the ticket back and go, I'm not accepting that. This is all free. What are you doing? Why don't you order something with alcohol in it? So I think that even though they're trying to be really nice, can alienate people. But that happens at companies too, free beer Fridays, things like that, where, people are getting pretty hammered at work sometimes. That can certainly alienate you if you don't drink for whatever reason, whether it's like me, where I just can't, I need to stay sober, or somebody, many of my friends that just decide that they are going to make a healthier choice or healthier decision and not drink. It can alienate you, and then you don't really feel welcome at these places. So I think that is part of the culture that I think needs to change, and HR is probably the biggest piece in a corporation that can push that through. So,
yeah, absolutely. And there's many levels. Thinking from my role as an event planner, just having non-alcoholic options and doing certain things at your current events that make it more accessible. So, yeah, it's a big deal. And, the other interesting part of this conversation that we all had was we were trying to, just talk about what industries or, is there a certain workplace type that is more of a drinking culture than not? And, interestingly enough, it shows up everywhere, and it can look different. And, so for those of you who are curious about that, I mean, certainly we all have our own stories in our own industries, but we did not rule anything out. It really shows up everywhere because everyone has a relationship with alcohol. So,
and Jen, I just have to give a shout out to the leadership of the SoberForce team, who have continued on the vision that we had. So we had a vision for a first happy sober hour at Dreamforce, which is a massive conference that Salesforce hosts, and it's happening this week. And I saw one of my SoberForce peeps is on the call, which is so great to see. Hi, Allison. And I'm so thrilled to share that they launched the Sober Happy Hour at Dreamforce, which is a massive conference. As I said, I think 125,000 people go, takes over all of San Francisco, and they booked registration for it over capacity. They had 440 RSVPs without even a lot of promotion. Honestly, it was kind of just a grassroots thing. They got it launched, they got it out there. IBM partnered to sponsor it, which was great. And it had a capacity of 100, I think, and they had 441 registrations. So it just goes to show the interest and the demand and the work that we do at visit.org, which is around social impact experiences as a way of delivering a feeling of belonging to the workplace and allowing the space for employees to do work on social impact causes that they care about, and using that for new hire onboarding and intern day of service and ERG support, right? So there's so many creative ways that we can support togetherness and culture of connection in the workplace that has nothing to do with a happy hour, nothing to do with booze, right? And can really be inclusive to everyone. And so I'm super excited to see this trend taking off, and I'm thrilled with the SoberForce team who pulled it off at Dreamforce this year.
Yeah, talk about an amazing case study. I would give anything to be there. But this shows the tipping point, right? This shows to me that there is an audience for it that hasn't asked for it, hasn't even thought to say, hey, could we have a few non-alcoholic options? So I just think it's brilliant. And I hope we can do more of that. So perfect segue into our next slide and conversation topic, which is community, and why community is so important. And Marin, you just touched on, belonging and what all of that means. And I think, Chris, I'd like you to talk about Sober Sidekick at this point, and also some of Chris Thompson's insight in how you've created community, even through an app, but how does it look, in that virtual app? How does that translate in a workplace? If you could share a few words on that.
Yeah, I know one of Chris's favorite stats is that 20% of recovery is care, and the 80% is environment. And so, the reason that one of the reasons anyway that we believe that Sober Sidekick is so powerful around community is that you can access that at any time. And if you choose to be, you can be anonymous. but many people choose not to be anonymous, which is interesting. I would have been on the anonymous side, if 6 years ago, if I had just started. But from a community perspective, the ability to tap in at any time and find other people that can see things the way that you see things, that may be experiencing a similar situation, feel less alone, or just feel not alone, and actually provide support, which is is a critical part of a lot of people's recovery. Even when you feel like you don't have a lot to give, being able to help someone out just by saying like, "Wow, great job, thank you." That is part of community building. And the way that we built Sober Sidekick was to kind of gamify that whole process, and to help people and help reduce the barrier to helping others. So really, not to sound too corny, but helping people help people. And that's one of the reasons why it grew, and why we don't have trolls on the platform. It's you have to help someone before you can post to ask for help. And I think that is a really that's how we are able to kind of keep our community growing as well, through that algorithm, which we call the empathy algorithm. But we've done a ton of studies. We have a ton of data that that we can track, and one of the things that we look at is what is the actual outcome here? Are we actually having an impact? And we have data that shows by multiples, when people are commenting, when people are engaging in the community, they are relapsing at a far lower rate than people who are not. And these are early statistics that we're already seeing, and we have a ton of other data like that. But we realized pretty quickly, way back, even when it was maybe 5,000, 10,000 members, that we're actually creating better outcomes, and that we can be a critical part of any recovery path, regardless of whether they choose to go to AA meetings if they're in recovery, or they just decide, I'm going to stop drinking and I want to have more understanding of this community and be a part of something that supports me. There are so many touch points throughout the day that you can just kind of jump into that community. I don't want to get too preachy here or pitch the app too much, but check it out, and I think you'll see what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's an amazing app. I've been a part of it for over a year, and it speaks to the importance of the different levels of where people are at in their journey with alcohol. And Sober Sidekick is definitely that immediacy piece of it, where people need to chime in every hour or so because it's that critical. And then this, the third pillar of what I call the environment in someone's, sobriety journey or recovery journey, the workplace is directly connected to the effectiveness of an individual's desire to not drink. So it's really critical, the work you're doing, Chris. And his point of the workplace might be someone's only lifeline to getting help or being seen. And lastly, I'll just say his favorite tagline, Chris Thompson's, that he shares is creating the most epic wave of comeback stories. So that support is very critical to that. All right, shall we advance? Gosh, our time together is just flying. I want to make sure we get through everything. Next topic, Marin. Conversations and support. So this one is, coming from how we actually start to have conversations about this in the workplace, and what we all discovered just in our conversations with, there's a lot of barriers to that. And how do you start that? Does it start at the leadership level? Does it start at HR? Does it start with someone who really cares about being able to be supported and making choices that are better for their life and their work environment? So with this one, let's see, I will turn it over to, let's start with Chris again, just to touch on this first piece of leaders addressing the conversation.
Yeah, I think regardless of whether you drink or not, I think that having vulnerability and just being a human is probably the most important aspect, the most important thing here. I've worked in some pretty special places and with some pretty amazing leaders that were very inspiring. And the difference between the ones that I will never forget and felt totally supported is not because they were saying, come to me whenever you have a problem, I'll do whatever it, I felt like I could because they were vulnerable, because, they recognized, oh my goodness, something in the world is, has taken place. And I think the team may just need to do what they need to do today. Or I'm not having a good day. I'm going to let people know so that my behavior is understood, perhaps, things that are just about being vulnerable. But around this conversation specifically, I think that, we all know, we all have someone in our lives at least, or know someone who is struggling with substance use. And we know people who are just deciding not to drink, whether they're struggling or not. I think that if we have, a more inclusive, if we can open up a little bit more to keeping that in mind and not having it be something that, where we are ashamed to talk about it. I think that the leaders that are doing that the right way are just simply having the conversation in a vulnerable way. Sometimes those conversations get a little awkward. That's okay, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But it doesn't need to be forced, and it's just part of life, So I was someone, and I'll quickly add this, I drank a lot, heavily, and I felt like I enjoyed it a great deal, and it was it had to do with my persona, and that was part of who I was. When I quit and was sober, I remember very specifically at my last agency, seeing there's alcohol in the cabinets, and just seeing the alcohol level never changing. And this is the place I said was very supportive. It never changed. No one was ever drinking, and that would have just lasted maybe a few days. If I were there actually drinking, it would have been all me. And I remember going like, who is going to drink this? This is ridiculous. And I remember mentioning it just because it was something that I thought was interesting, and people thought that it was cool that I brought it up. They didn't even realize that it was something that would bother someone remotely, and so I remember going, oh, interesting. I felt abrasive, that I was being abrasive, but people actually felt that it was something, it actually made them feel better about the conversation because I was just mentioning it. So
that's
anyway.
great. I think that it can be, people can feel different ways about that in the workplace, but I think it's when you are actively planning and plotting how you're going to drink, having that kind of thing around in the workplace becomes very hard to do your job and focus at work, I think. I would love to turn it over to Laurie at this point. We haven't heard as much from her, and this is kind of her area of expertise in workplace environment and supporting, families and people in recovery. So Laurie, please.
Yeah, I've got a couple thoughts. When someone decides that they're ready to seek help, one of the most important things that needs to be there for them is a safe space. And I think, as we talked about just a little bit earlier, sometimes workplaces might be the only safe place for them. And Marin also mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, though, that fear that exists, fear of being able to disclose what they're going through because of all the shame and stigma that surrounds it. So imagine if you had any other type of disease, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and you had to be scared to ask for help to get treatment for that condition. I think that's what a lot of people who are struggling with substance use feel. So from a leadership standpoint and from a workplace standpoint, that's where we as either, colleagues or leaders can create a culture of empathy, create a culture of vulnerability, so that when we care about somebody who is struggling, they're able to open up. Now, a lot of times, leaders might be suspicious of some substance use. They might be concerned about that because we see the behaviors. And a lot of times as a family member or a friend or a colleague, we see somebody drinking too much. We see them, being overserved at an event, and we see the behavior that comes after that. And as humans, we can tend to start to look at that and place judgment on it. Well, they're just drinking too much, or they can't control their liquor. All these things come out. But what we really need to be doing is to be curious about that behavior. What's underneath the reason why somebody is using alcohol to cope with something? We all cope with difficult situations in our life in different ways. For some people, they choose alcohol because it is a substance that allows people to relax. It allows them to show up in an environment where maybe they feel really scared to. There's many, many different reasons why people use a substance that actually makes sense. So when we can start to understand that, I believe it opens up more compassion for us to come alongside this person and say, hey, what's going on? And make an offer to help. What can I do to help? And I think a lot of people in the workplace, especially leaders, are scared to have this discussion, which also makes a lot of sense. That's completely normal. And so I think we're going to be offering up maybe some resources at the end to help you navigate these types of discussions. But I guess if you could remember anything, be curious, not furious, in terms of why that employee of yours or that friend or family member is using substances as a way to cope with what's ever going on in their lives.
Oh, I love that, Laurie. Thanks for sharing that. Good segue into the next slide on productivity. So really, this one is a little bit meatier, and between Marin and Laurie, we do have a lot of stats and had some really great conversation about what this looks like. Laurie, do you want to kind of kick this off?
Yeah, and I kind of want to talk about productivity from a couple of different standpoints, and I think Marin will have some great information here too. I mean, the first, obviously, is if a person chooses to use alcohol or any type of substance in the workplace, that's definitely going to have an impact on that person's productivity, even if they think it's not. And so some of the stats that we took a look at when we were looking at this information, this is from the American Psychiatric Association Center for Workplace Health, that excessive alcohol consumption is costing the U.S. $240 billion annually, and 72% of that is actually due to lost wages from reduced work productivity. And those are stats from a few years ago. So with the pandemic, those numbers have really skyrocketed even more. So, that's pretty scary when you think about it. So that's one thing. And then the other is back to the support system too. Anybody who's concerned about somebody who's struggling with substance use, that's also having an impact on them as an employee. And so let me just kind of give you a for instance of what that looks like. That might be a mom who's at work spending time Googling treatment centers so that she can get her son in someplace who's really at a crisis level. This could look like somebody who is on the phone with an insurance company for hours trying to figure out what their insurance is going to cover for their spouse, right? These are situations that we bring into our lives as a support member. And undoubtedly, we're having to spend some time at work because we're trying to help our person and we're really concerned about that. So just think about the last time that you cared for somebody that was struggling with a health issue or a difficult situation in your life, how that impacted you throughout the workday. And now think of the fact that you'd have to hide that. And you can't let anybody else know about that because you're ashamed or there's a stigma on top of that your person is struggling. So we want to help bring that into the light. And again, I think as employers and creating healthy workplace cultures, that we have support systems in place, no matter what kind of disease or health condition that our people may be struggling with, or their support system may be struggling with as well.
Thank you, Laurie. Marin, would you care to comment on that or maybe advance to
the stats are astounding. The lost productivity, the heartbreak, the devastation, the family medical leave, the amount of time. And that's something that we definitely had quite a few members of our group in Sober Force who were parents of or married to or the sibling of a loved one struggling with addiction. And you're spot on, Laurie, the amount of time, even at a company who has tremendous benefits, like Salesforce is known for having outstanding benefits, you're in a state of crisis. and you're trying to navigate a really complex, at least in the United States, highly complicated medical system of what's covered, what's not, and do you have availability? Do you have a bed available? How do I even go about an intervention? And so what we tried to do was connect as I said earlier, the benefits into a cheat sheet, a quick point of reference that was pinned to our Slack channel. The group was hosted on Slack. We did that very intentionally, and I'm jumping ahead to tools, but we used this very intentionally as a way to surface this amazing information of benefits in a way that was consumable when you're in a point of crisis, and hopefully reaching you before the point of crisis. But wanting it to be really easy to surface up. If you need treatment, here are the numbers to call that are your specific benefit lines, whether you have United Health Group or Aetna or whoever you have as your insurance cover. So those, honestly, those small acts of points of connection to just make it easier to get help makes a world of difference and saves that person a bunch of heartache and time trying to figure it out on their own. And then I'll jump ahead to my next slide. Something we talk a lot about at visit.org. And again, this is taking a step back. This is a much broader scope because we're around all social impact areas. So this is separate from the topic of recovery or not drinking, but it's connected in that we know that addiction thrives in isolation. We know what the pandemic has done to overdose rates, as we talked about, and that then further impact on productivity. And the Gallup survey, and this is from 2021, shows that employees are feeling disengaged, 79%, 67% say they're not thriving, 48% looking for a new job. So this isn't just people in addiction, this is everyone. And so you add on top of that then people who struggle with addiction or are struggling with, who have had recovery and are relapsing because they're isolated. And this has a massive impact on the workforce, right? And so how can we be intentional about creating a way to connect, to feel belonging, to feel a part of? As Laurie said, the pathway of recovery, and Christy, you said it too, the pathway to recovery is connection. Addiction does not thrive in community. It thrives in isolation. And so where we can create community intentionally in the workplace where we spend most of our days, not only leads to a feeling of belonging, which leads to productivity and retention of employees, but also leads to people being able to sustain their recovery. And so I really see all of these as very intertwined. So at the risk of Chris, I'm doing the hard pitch now. But I share this slide really for that middle stat, which is where you can be intentional in creating a feeling of belonging and culture will help your people stay well. And this is really the future of work. Well-being is the future of work. I just read a great white paper. I'll share it out after to you, Jen. But this is where we're going. And the companies who figure this out are going to be the ones who attract the top talent and retain the best talent and have the healthiest, most productive workforce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Great share, Marin. And I love these stats because I do think that there's a lot of tools and productivity things out there that can cost a lot of money to implement. And some of what we're talking about is really just human consideration and, things that you take away from the workplace, for example. So it's definitely worth taking a look in your well-being mix and in making sure that, this is part of that. All right. Approach and tools. Yes. So let's dive in here. We've got a couple different levels of ideas for you because we really want to address people who, are as an individual in a workplace, what could you do? And then as a company, what can you do? So there's a couple tracks here. Because we've all talked about this, maybe I'll have Chris start with the individual because I liked how you talk about uncoupling alcohol from your workplace persona.
Yeah, this is not speaking from experience as much because I didn't ask for help until, I had to go into detox and treatment, which was the best thing that I've ever done for myself, I think. But of course, if I had to do it again, I would have asked for help. I didn't hit rock bottom at all, but I was lucky and I happened to not. The importance of asking for help is just part of it, though, because you're not going to ask for it if you don't feel like you're going to be taken seriously, or even worse, if you're going to be judged. And so if there is that feeling of, well, everybody will think I'm a certain way, or will look down upon me, or maybe it's too scary because you're now addressing it yourself, it can be really hard. So, that's all about environment as well, and the people who are around. So that's also why some people decide, like, I'm not going to tell anybody about this. I'm just going to, join a community where I can kind of observe a little bit and see what it's like. That's why groups like Soberforce are so critical, because it allows them to look, it's very open and welcoming here. I can feel like asking for help is actually, like, they would want me to do this. If I want to really be a good employee, they would encourage me to ask for help and get the help I need. And I didn't think it was a hard sell at all, Marin. Those are just hard facts. I mean, I agree with you 100%. I loved that slide and what you were saying. So I thought it was great. And I agree with everything. So I thought, it's not a hard sell when those are when that's what you do. I mean, I think that was awesome. So asking for help. It also takes the other, it also takes the environment to support that. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll chime in here just with a comment of, again, the people in workplace who would like to not drink for whatever reason, if they are the ones also asking for these things, that can really help everyone in moving that forward. For the company ideas, Marin, would you like to chime in and just talk about Soberforce? And I mean, I'm thinking about the tools you've already talked about, but even just coming out of the pandemic, having your employees figure out how to go back into sales and do a networking event or dinner without alcohol when they've never done that before.
Oh my goodness. We did have people. That was quite a lot of the phone calls I would get was from people who are new to sobriety and maybe even new to sales and new to their sales career, calling me saying, and this is with Soberforce in existence, and still calling and saying, I'm supposed to go to this wine tasting. I'm totally freaked out. What do I do? Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to miss a networking opportunity? Is my career going to go down the tubes if I don't go and I don't meet this chief marketing officer? And I said, all I can tell you is my career will go down the tubes if I drink. So if this situation puts your life at risk, it is not worth whatever perceived outcome you think you're going to have, because the foundation is recovery. If you're an addict and you're an alcoholic, your foundation is staying sober. So that's the first thing. Do not go anywhere that's going to put you in a position of harm. I promise you, your employer cares more about you being well than they care about your face being at a wine tasting. And then to take it to the next step, I'd say, and also companies, can we not do a better job of being more creative in the way that we create gatherings? And the simple acts of having a non-alcoholic sparkling grape juice out where there's also champagne, and having it clearly labeled so that my option is not go find water somewhere. And sometimes there isn't even water. It's booze or nothing. So it is those little moments that really stand out to me of, okay, I'm included. It's having ways of connecting. Like this morning, I got to start my day by talking about International Day of Peace and the theme around ending racism and how do I find peace within. And I got to start my day discussing that with colleagues as part of our culture club at visit.org. So, that's genuine connection. So this is so much bigger than just this isn't just for the people who identify as alcoholic or in recovery. This is just humans needing to connect on a genuine level. And how can we get more creative and have more in it? And it's Chris hit it. I think it was Chris, maybe it was Jen. I don't know. Someone said it. It's about vulnerability. It's about being able to be vulnerable with each other. And we're still there to do work. It's not therapy. We go to Laurie for that. It's not there. It's not therapy. But it's connection that's not based on alcohol connection, right? And there's so many ways we can do that, and so many companies who are doing it well. And I'm really excited to see the movement of DEI and ERGs taking off in the workplace to facilitate those connections and create spaces where employees feel seen and heard and valued for their whole selves.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Marin. Laurie, do you have anything else you want to add to the company or individual really approach and tools?
Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to mention as a resource, and maybe I'm jumping ahead here though, is for people that really want to understand how do they start to create this culture within their environment that is recovery friendly, or that even creates an opportunity for people to come to them and say, hey, I'm struggling. There's this amazing recovery friendly workplace toolkit, and I'm going to put a link in the chat section here. This one is put out by the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence, but it was actually initiated, if anyone remembers the Startup Recovery a few years ago by Melissa and Luke Kolsing. They actually did some great work to put this together. Recovery is no longer around, but that the kind of their work lives on in this, and it's a wonderful resource for anybody out there, whether you're an employee, a leader, any role in the company. To say, hey, I'm passionate about creating safe and friendly workplaces for people that are struggling with any sort of addiction. So I'm going to share that. But yeah, I agree with everything that Marin and Chris have said here. And also, again, making sure that you've got support for the support system too, because this is, we talk a lot about addiction as a family disease. And while that's in the family, I mean, think about our work families. We spend more time with our work family sometimes than we do with, the people in our household. So this really is, it's a community disease, and we've seen the numbers that have just skyrocketed over the past couple of years. So it really is going to take everybody to start to make some changes within the spaces that we live and work and play.
Yeah, absolutely. Ooh, and this slide. Okay. This is for everyone, just some question prompts based on, where you're at in this conversation and some things to be thinking about. Number one, what if I choose not to drink at the next work function, or drink a non-alcoholic option if it's available to you? What would that look like? Would that be awkward? How would your workplace support that? How would you go about planning and feeling supported in doing that? Second question, what if I, as a founder or leader, created a culture to support this in my workplace? What would that look like? Where would you start? And lastly, what if you're someone who really is passionate about not wanting to drink for whatever reason? Who would you talk to in your organization? Is it possible to talk with someone and perhaps be that person that puts this in front of your organization to say, it's time we make some changes? So those are just some of the questions that we wanted to share with you all. And then we also, Twin Cities Startup Week has a fancy QR code for a survey, and that, I believe you can just take your phone to the screen, if you would, and scan that, and it just leads you to a survey to provide us with a little feedback. So we'll leave that up as we now open it up. We had 20 people in our program. So if there's people that want to raise your hand, contribute, or have any questions, we will take those now. And I think between the three of us, I'd be interested if, if we didn't cover something, Marin, Laurie, Chris, that you feel came up or you want to share now, I would go ahead and do that. And then just invite people to place questions in the chat or the Q&A.
I just got to read what Ryan wrote, which is really powerful. People in the Sober Curious camp that he's encountered, his favorite quote about destigmatizing, having to hit, quote, rock bottom before you seek help, or looking like the worst we could imagine. Bottom is when you stop digging. I love that.
Yeah.
And I think that's super important. There are people who have mirrored back who've mirrored back to me, like, I didn't realize that I could have a successful sales career in high tech and not drink. You don't realize these perceptions that exist because excessive drinking is so normalized in our culture and so many cultures around the world, that there are misconceptions about what it means to be successful in fill in the blank field. Advertising. Chris occupied another space that's well known for that. And so just to model it, that's, representation matters. It's just another example of representation matters. Show people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I too appreciate that comment, Ryan. And also just, thinking about my journey. And it was sort of, that was my rock bottom at corporate, and it was just burnout, however you define it. I think a lot of what we hear about burnout in the workplace is actually labeled or called stress, when underlying it, for me at least, was progressive alcohol use related to that. I think that's the story that we don't always hear, right?
I think people are able to come off of mute, yes, if they have questions, or no?
I think so. Let's see.
And you brave souls out there who have questions, friends. Or a story you want to share of your own success?
I see Allison noted in the chat, I find even my drinking friends want to try my non-alcoholic beverages when they come to my house. Yeah. So there are so many great options now. In fact, I honestly still can't believe at events it's just not offered. Last night I was at an event at the History Center, and we stood in line for 20 minutes hoping there would be something, and literally club soda. Just, I'll take 3 club sodas. They didn't even charge us. And I have encountered that a lot of times, they'll go through a list of 20 things that are juice and soda related, and I end up with a club soda. The 2 people that were with me, we just had to laugh. It's the reality. And I think a lot of people who do drink at those things don't even realize we don't have options if we choose not to.
Mm-hmm.
Another, I'd say, we'll just occupy the space if people don't come off mute. I'd say another thing, there was like a small tweak, but an important one is the idea of like gifts and what do you send at the holidays, and how many people send the reward is a bottle of champagne or a bottle of wine for like closing a big deal. Mm-hmm. And how many people who would receive that and then reach out to me and say, I don't know what to do. I just got this package of wine sent to my house and I'm counting days. Like, what do I do with this? It's really good wine. I'm like, who cares? Throw it in the trash.
Get rid of it, right? Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Laurie.
No, I actually was thinking about that earlier too, that, if there's one thing you can do, it's stop giving alcohol as gifts, and that can be really triggering for somebody, especially if they're in early recovery. And, the first 5 years of recovery for somebody are the biggest chance of relapse or reoccurrence of their disease. So again, just creating a culture that doesn't cause something to be triggered or doesn't cause people to be concerned about, what do I do next? This is, because they've been triggered. There's that fear there that they're not going to be able to control what's going on right now in their lives.
Mm-hmm. So unintentional harm.
It's something that I even, after a year or 2 of sobriety, it's so in our culture that it would come to those times where you go, okay, I have to buy something for someone. And then I'm like, I don't even know what to buy except for scotch, like what to get for someone. And I had to go figure that out. It's really important to find other options.
I always say, people have to eat. So find a gift card to a great restaurant.
Right. There's a question here from Kate I want to call out. She said, are there any tips you might have to determine if a person's HR department is a safe space like Chris was lucky enough to experience? That is a really good question, and I don't know that I have a black and white answer for it. I'm curious to hear what my panelists say.
I think.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Marin. Finish up, and then I can chime in.
I was just say, there's a lot of elements of like it's nuance, and you have to use your own judgment of, is my leader a safe person to talk to, or is my leader a raging alcoholic who is definitely not the person to talk to? And do I need to go find another leader in my space who seems safer, right? You are a protected class. When you're seeking treatment, you are protected. You cannot be fired when you have said, I'm an alcoholic who needs help, or I'm an addict who needs help and I need to get treatment. You cannot be fired for you are protected in that situation. However, determining go ahead, Laurie. I was going to say, I don't know how you would determine if.
Yeah. Sometimes it's even looking at your, employee assistance program, to going to your HR person and just saying, I really need to just get an understanding of all the benefits that are available to me. Sometimes kind of even plain dumb, not even specifically asking about substance use, but just really understanding your benefits and seeing what's in there for treatment or for substance use. Some companies do a really good job of spelling this out. I'm guessing that Salesforce does. And if companies don't, there might be a gap there. So even just kind of understanding what's in place. And if, I think a good company, good leadership will clearly spell that out. They'll probably also have some policy in place in terms of how they would address any type of alcohol or substance use issues within the workplace.
Mm-hmm. I see Christo says, and I'm just laughing because I'm like, yeah. When I would say I was sober at work, the drinking crowd would worry about me relapsing more than their own prioritization of alcohol. Yes. And I would say the ones who are most interested in my sobriety and ask the most questions sometimes tend to be the ones who perhaps need to look at their drinking themselves. Not to say curiosity is wrong, but there's a level at which it tips over into you're doing a self-assessment now.
Right.
Ryan says, with the escalation of the work from home environment, have you seen any trends developing in utilization of resources versus isolation or hiding their problems? I don't know if anyone has stats on the panel for that. I don't have stats right off the top of my head, but I think we've all seen across the board that companies really are becoming much more vocal about support specifically for mental health issues. And mental health and substance use, it's a co-occurring disorder. So approximately 65% of people that have mental health issues also have a substance use disorder. So they're highly correlated. So I think that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg, what we're starting to see. But we've also seen the numbers rise dramatically. So we know that there has to be more solutions coming out of this. But again, then we're seeing great things like from Sober Sidekick that is helping bring people together in community, especially in this more isolated environments that we've been living and working in.
Yeah.
I think we'll see more of that.
I'd also love to add to that just this opportunity to pause and reassess workplace as we're trying to attract employees to actually come back into the office. And I have seen things happening like building a bar in the center of your workplace. An East Coast company decided that was the only way to get people to come back is to provide alcohol and social gatherings. So there's definitely concerning things happening and, things to really look at and be careful of. And I think the language that companies use in creating their events and gatherings is also really important. So I just wanted to make sure everyone is aware of that. And a lot of times I know in my past, I haven't called that out when I've seen it, but there is a way to say, hey, you might want to, not center wine and wellness or, wine and networking. Just, always make sure you're providing options and thinking with an inclusive lens for this crowd. So yeah, as we're kind of wrapping up here, I just want to say thank you so much to everyone that chimed in. Marin said she'd seen a few familiar names. I do as well from my network. And, the four of us came together because we're very passionate about this topic. And I did a little tally as we were talking. We have 31 years of combined sobriety between us, and we are, a force in what looks like change and what we want to see. So as we kind of wrap up with all of our stats, we do have a handout that we can share with everyone. And I believe we'll also be getting, if you contribute to the survey, we will have your info so that we can share that. And we will also post it. I believe we can do that through Twin Cities Startup Week connected to the program. So, gosh, anything else, panelists, that we want to say? Or looks like everyone is thanking us.
Find us on LinkedIn. Stay connected. Yeah. Allison, you and I are due for a catch up. Yeah, I would love anyone who has, any other questions, just always feel free to reach out on LinkedIn and ping a message over.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you, panelists, for being so willing to chime into this, and we made it work. If you all know, we did switch over from in-person to virtual. I was drinking, for full disclosure, an NA beverage from Hairless Dog by Finnegan's, for the record. So you can do that if you choose non-alcoholic. So
thanks, Jen, for organizing this.
Yeah,
appreciate everyone who joined us. Thanks, everyone out there.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.